Hey, welcome to Mikey's Video Game Madness. Today we're playing Tekken 3 for the PlayStation 1. I'm actually playing this on the PlayStation 4 if you're wondering why. It looks slightly smoother and is in widescreen. The top is slightly cropped, but that's the best I can do with the editing software. It doesn't let me get too precise. Right now I'm showing you the different modes of this game. Originally, of course, it was in the arcades, but this was one of those PlayStation 1 conversions that was like way better than the arcade game, except for, of course, the graphics, and I'll get into that in a minute. But it had so many bonus characters. Right now, it's a base game. I recorded this when I just got it, so I didn't have anything unlocked. I actually got Tekken 7 and really liked it, and then remembered how much I liked this game and got it. The major difference between this and the arcade game is, beside the extra content, is that if you notice in the background, it's kind of flat, like everything's like basically 2D, like it's just a wall or a skybox basically, whereas in the arcade game everything was rendered in full polygons. But that's a small price to pay. Like, this game was thought to be undoable on PlayStation 1 hardware, but I saw the arcade game and I played the arcade game because Tekken 5 actually comes with the arcade version of Tekken 3. But the great thing about Tekken 3, remember, I have a chest cold, so this might be the last video I do before I potentially die, but I still want to make videos. It's been easier to record the videos on the PlayStation 4, and what's funny is I actually get more views that way. I appreciate whatever, like, I'm not making revenue of it. It's just something I noticed, because when you make edited videos like this, a little bit more work goes into it, but I feel like the commentary tends to be better. That's just my personal opinion, but I don't know how exciting this commentary is going to be, because I feel like dog shit. I don't know why I specifically picked dog, but, you know, maybe it's the most common shit beside people shit. People shit's kind of gross. And whoever says I feel like people shit, you know? So, whatever. Anyway, you're wondering why I'm doing a fighting game. Well, I didn't want to take the time to actually record a new game. And this was the last game that was sitting in my capture folder, which is basically a folder where I put all my game captures. This was actually like recorded in July 2017. It's February 2018. Since this is a fighting game, there's not much to tell you, so it's story times, kids. Anyway, I said story times, kids. But anyway, to give you an idea of my history with Tekken, the first Tekken game I ever played was Tekken 2. I had a friend at the time who got a PlayStation, and I remember the cutscenes for the time. They look atrocious now, being like really gorgeous, like the best cutscenes I had ever seen in my entire life at that point. This is coming from somebody who had a Sega CD, so, you know, how good could the cutscenes be to blow my mind? And I mean, they didn't have to be that great, and they were CGI, and that was really cool. And I remember playing the fighting game, and I wasn't too into it, you know? It just felt really, I don't know how to explain it, but I want to use the word rigid, but I don't think that's right. It just felt very wooden, I guess would be a better way. And I thought maybe I just don't like 3D fighters. And then this kid had everything. He was like a kid with like a just who lived with his mom. Like, his dad basically bailed out on him and probably visited him like maybe like once every 2 years or whatever. And back then, when you're young, you still think your dad's great because he's not present, so you can't really form an opinion. I don't know. I've never been in that situation, so I can't necessarily relate to it. In a way, I was kind of jealous of those kids because, you know, growing up, my parents argued a lot and stuff like that, and I thought it would be great to have parents that didn't fight all the time or whatever, but that's a whole different story, and that's my personal life. I don't know if I want to put that out there today, but, you know, But anyway, to make up for it, he basically got whatever he wanted. And he had like this, since he got this brand new PlayStation, I think the Nintendo 64. He might have had a Nintendo 64 and then he got a PlayStation. I don't remember the order. It's not relevant. But I just remember being more impressed with the PlayStation than the Nintendo 64 just because of the CD format and the cutscenes, blah blah blah. And I felt like the 3D looked comparable. Going back now, I think the Nintendo 64 seemed to put a lot of polygons and stuff that maybe necessarily the PlayStation 1 couldn't handle. But the PlayStation 1 always seemed to have better textures. But he let me borrow his 32X because he had like no use for it. He had like the newest systems, and on the 32X he had Virtua Fighter. No, it's not as good as the arcade game, and I never played the arcade game, but I remember playing that, and it absolutely blew my mind. It was so fluid and great, and it felt so much better than Tekken. So then I'm like, all right, 3D games are really cool. And then somebody, I don't remember who exactly it was. Like, my parents were friends with these people at the time when they were doing the we had like a family DJing karaoke business when I was in middle school, and my friends were these people, and they brought over their kids, and they're like, go upstairs and play. And his parents made him bring over his Sega Saturn, and I think it came with 3 games. If I'm not mistaken, it came with Daytona USA, Virtual Cop 2, and Virtual Fighter 2. I was impressed with all of them. Not a huge racing fan, but I thought Daytona USA was really cool, and it was kind of arcadey, so I could hang with it. And even though I didn't have a light gun, I thought Virtual Cop 2 was great. But seeing Virtual Fighter 2, especially after playing the 32X version, even though, again, with the Saturn port, just like the PlayStation port here, it's not as good as the arcade game, but I don't know if they added extra stuff in the Saturn version, but I remember loving that. So eventually, as time went on, and I decided, even though I love my Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis, instead of going with what was familiar with either the Saturn or the Nintendo 64, I ended up getting the PlayStation because I just was really liking the library, especially like Resident Evil. Although the Saturn did eventually get Resident Evil, and the Nintendo 64 eventually got Resident Evil 2, but that's neither here nor there. But eventually got a PlayStation, loved it, and I've subscribed to this magazine called PSM, which was PlayStation Magazine. It was the unofficial PlayStation magazine. This you could tell that I'm trying to switch the controllers to I can't remember why I had to do that, but I did it. Like, again, I recorded this in July. I apologize. There's no random select mode, so I'm just kind of like, it looks like I'm being more careful this time, but and you saw in the beginning, I just held like the left button and just picked whoever. I beat the game with every single character when I rented this, so I'm pretty familiar with most of the characters in this game, although you wouldn't know that because I'm awful now, but you got to think I haven't played this game, gosh, I don't know how long ago this game came out. I know I was probably it's like either 16 or 17 when this game came out, but I had the PlayStation magazine, PSM, which in my opinion was better than the official PlayStation magazine, even though that one came with a demo disc. That one was, the PlayStation magazine was actually mostly the staff and crew from Game Players, which was my favorite magazine like when I was even younger. And that one sadly is no more. I absolutely love the Game Players and their sense of humor and their laid back nature. And I liked how they covered everything instead of just one particular brand like Nintendo Power or whatever Sega's magazine was called. And since I liked them, even though the unofficial PlayStation magazine focused just on Sony products. Like I really fell in love with the writers and stuff like that, so I really liked it. And they covered Tekken 3, and I was like, oh, let me read about it. I wasn't really into fighting games, but I was curious. You know, I really like Virtual Fighter. Obviously, Virtual Fighter is not coming out on the PlayStation anytime soon. Eventually, it did, I think, with Virtual Fighter 4 on the PlayStation 4. And I read it and I liked it, and I was really impressed with the graphics. This was one of the best looking PlayStation games at the time. That's of course up to one's opinion, but I thought it was. And playing it in person, like, this is a higher resolution game. Obviously, you probably can't tell with this, but compared to other PlayStation games, it was in higher resolution. Like when you play on a CRT monitor, when the PlayStation played in its higher resolution mode, or if you played not a CRT monitor, CRT television, and with the AV cables, just like if you played with the Dreamcast, which was always in high resolution mode, and the PlayStation 2, like everything kind of looked like it was so sharp, like especially with the reds, it kind of always looked like it was moving. So that's how you could tell it wasn't a high resolution mode. I don't know how to explain it. There's probably a word for it. Obviously, I don't know it because, you know, it's Mikey's Video Game Madness. What more do you want? But I ended up playing it and absolutely loving it. And then I went back to Blockbuster Video. At the time, Blockbuster Video actually sold video game accessories and stuff like that. And I got a second controller, so my sister could play and a friend or whatever could come over and play. But I remember me and my sister playing this game a lot. We never played video games together. There's only been a handful of games that she ever got into, but this was one that we could both get into and have a good time and play. And then part of what made this game great is that there was these beautiful, like, if I thought the cutscenes on the PlayStation 2 looked, I'm not the PlayStation 2, on Tekken 2 looked great. Like, the cutscenes on this fucking blew my mind, you know. They were great. This disc was so jam-packed with content, and then they had that Streets of Rage mode. I don't remember what it was called, but you walk around and you beat up people. That was the only character I couldn't unlock because you had to beat that mode, but I was able to beat all the other modes, and this disc was jam-packed. Either I had a defective disc or it just had so much data on the disc, like the disc would just mess up. Like when you finally, I think the last character you finally unlock, which there's quite a few, was Gone, which is like this little dinosaur character. I think he's like from a Japanese manga, which is a Japanese comic book if you're not familiar. And they added him, and his cutscene at the end would always freeze towards the end, and then I had to restart the game. Like, it would always like fuck up. I don't know if that was a disc, or I don't know if they added so much on the CD-ROM, like the game just couldn't handle it. But as far as this versus Tekken 2, I guess me playing Virtual Fighter a lot and stuff like that, I became more forgiving with the mechanics. Like Tekken feels still like Tekken 2, or Tekken 3 still feels like Tekken 2. It's a lot nicer version. Also, I had a PlayStation, so I was getting more used to the 3D plane. Like before that, the only fighting games I ever played were Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat, and I was mostly a Mortal Kombat person because, let's face it, Mortal Kombat's a lot simpler than Street Fighter. Now as time has gone on, I've appreciated Street Fighter a lot more than perhaps Mortal Kombat. I'm like, Mortal Kombat's pretty straightforward, but Street Fighter is a game that you really want to master. Now, people that are really good at fighting games say that this is a game that you need to master, and I guess so. There's like a lot of juggling and stuff like that, even though you only use like 4 buttons. I think each button, I'm sorry for constantly coughing. Me talking is like irritating my gag reflex and making me choke. So the way this game works is like basically each button controls like a limb, which is kind of cool. But once you figure out a character and you really get into it, Like, it just feels so smooth and so great. And when me and my sister were playing, I always made her use the controller we got at Blockbuster, which was, I believe, a Mad Catz controller. That thing felt hollower than like a cheap TV remote control. Like, you could shake it and you could hear stuff rattle inside. This came out, I believe, before the dual analog controller, or the Dual Shock. There was an analog controller before the Dual Shock. Ironically, in Japan, theirs actually had the Dual Shock feature with the two motors, the rumble, if you will. But when we got our analog controllers, not a lot of games supported it, but we didn't have the rumble feature. When I finally cut the freaking neighbor's grass 3 times, because I think he only paid me like $10, which even back then was super low, I was able to get a dual analog, or Dual Shock 1. I keep on wanting to call it the dual analog controller because that's what I called it back in the day. If you can imagine it, back then a new controller only cost $30. But I remember frantically going back and forth to Blockbuster because barely any game supported the rumble feature, and I got this brand new controller that didn't even freaking rumble on every game. I think the first 2 games that I got to have actual rumble was this weird shooting game. Like, Phil Hartman actually did the voice. They were going to do a second game, but unfortunately he passed away. It's called Blasto. I didn't really like it that much. And then there was like a nice 3D shooter. It kind of looked like Wipeout, and it was called Nitrous Oxide, and it had like really catchy music, and it was really fun, and I really liked it a lot. I wasn't any good at it, but I really liked it. But there's not really much to say about Tekken except that it's a great game in a series that's continued on to this day. I'm kind of bummed that Tekken 7 doesn't have as much content as like the games that came out before it. Like I said, like Tekken 5, that Tekken 1, 2, 3, the arcade versions, not the PlayStation versions that had more stuff. But it had Tekken 1, 2, 3, and then it had like some sort of like third-person game where you played as Jen, I believe. And then it had like, I can't remember what it was called, but it was like this 3D shooter Namco arcade game. You actually played it during the load screen, but you actually couldn't unlock the full game. I can't remember what it was called. I think it actually had its own individual release on the PlayStation 1 or Saturn or one of those systems, but it was actually on the disc. That was like loaded with stuff. I don't know how much is on Tekken 6. I haven't really played a lot of Tekken 6, but Tekken 7, just like Street Fighter, kind of came out bare bones, but it did have an arcade and story mode, but the arcade mode kind of sucked because it was so short, and there's like no real ending because they want you to rely on the story mode. But just like the story mode on Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, I think that's what it's called, like, there's just a lot of filler where you're fighting like the same henchmen over and over again. It just feels like filler so much. But it's a gorgeous game, and I guess if you're a competitive fighter, especially online, it's great. But going back and looking at the older ports of the Tekken series, it's kind of disappointing not to have all the extras that you're accustomed to. But anyway, I'm gonna call it a day. Like, there's actually more video I could talk over, but there's not much to say about this game, or that I feel like talking about this game. So story time's over. It's a great game, wonderful release, beautiful for PlayStation 1, and I believe there's like kind of like an upgrade. It's like Tekken Tag Tournament. It was like Tekken 3 with like a tag feature that came out on PlayStation 2, and then they actually came out with a remastered version on PlayStation 3, which was, I can't remember what it was called, but it was whatever Tekken Tag game came out before Tekken Tag Tournament 2, which is its own thing. But anyway, fantastic game. I like it a lot. If you like fighting games, this might be for you. It's a little bit more wooden than Virtual Fighter. I'm talking like nobody's ever played this before, but it's a great game and a ton of unlockables. Like, to me, that's the reason to play this. Beside the smooth fighting mechanics, is just to see how many characters you can unlock before there aren't any. And the cutscenes still look fairly decent. They don't look as good as like cutscenes you see today, but they surprisingly hold up a lot better than I thought they would. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you're all doing well, and take care. Bye.
If you want to, like, comment, and subscribe! Thanks for watching!